charts with two questions. How easy or difficult is it for you to telework effectively? So it was that that the most of respondents consider remote work easy. As an overall result of the easy one is almost 62%. And the response for whom nothing has changed is 18%, which in total is more than 80%. So at the same time, almost 18% of civil servants consider telecommuting a little difficult. In our view, it is likely that this part of the civil servants will adapt to the new working conditions and will make up the majority of civil servants, which are willing to work in a distance. So it should be noted that the number of respondents for whom remote work has become very difficult is very small, only 1.5%. So next question: what are the three important changes you noticed while teleworking? It turned out to be that employees came across with such drawbacks as the home distractions, most of all. Secondly, they faced difficulty with arranging their workplaces. Thirdly, they felt frustration connected with social isolation. And fourthly, many civil servants experienced communication difficulties with each other. So there is a slide 2, again, with two questions. The first question is, how often have you been limited in adherence to the work schedule while working remotely? So the overwhelming majority of respondents, almost 84%, or 114 people out of 136 people, contacted their superiors every day during the quarantine period. As you can see, modern means of communication, so just allow subordinates to be in contact with their leaders all the time. That's the second question. If you had to telework on a full-time basis, how long can you feel comfortable?
There is some problem connection with sound.
Sound?
With Mirat's sound.
Oh, I can hear Mirat.
Huh?
I can hear.
Okay. Let me continue. Can I continue?
Yes, please.
It turned. Okay. So it turned out to be that more than half of the respondents, 60%, feel comfortable working remotely on a long, on an ongoing basis for 3 or more months. At the same time, the percentage of those who strongly do not support this format of work turned out to be 21%, which is really significant. So there is the next slide. There are again two questions. How limited were you to exercise leadership to make the right decision while managing during a state of emergency for managers? So it can be concluded that the leadership during the state of emergency associated with the COVID-19 pandemic was quite comfortable. Thus, the number of managers who did not feel so limited and were not limited in anything, in general, amounted more than 60%. Probably some managers need direct contact with their subordinates due to their belonging to different psychological types. As I said before, sanguine, cholerics, phlegmatic, and so on. In general, we can conclude that the remote work format does not greatly limit their managerial actions. Next question: how limited were telecommunication facilities for teleworking during this period? Here you can see that only slightly less than 14% of the respondents turned out to be most limited and very limited. The overwhelming majority of the respondents do not experience at all or experience minor restrictions in the means of telecommunications. This result Do you hear me, guys?
Probably.
Do you hear me? Okay. This result speaks for the good equipment, I think, of civil servants with telecommunication devices. A lower percentage of respondents working at a distance on a permanent basis can be supplied with technical equipment at the expense of the state, if necessary. So the results of the survey showed that, again, the smaller part of the respondents experienced inconvenience in adhering to the work schedule and accounted for 20% of the total. So I think at home it is difficult to comply with the work schedule, especially with families with small children and people who are not used to work independently, and who do not have self-discipline. Thus, with the further transfer of civil servants to remote work format, one should approach differently to different categories of employees. So it should be noted that the telework is not suitable for any public servant due to his personal qualities. The influence of temperaments, as I said before, sanguine, choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, to telework requires further research. So let me conclude my report. So the use of telework seems to be very attractive both for civil servants and state bodies. However, labor legislation and the law on civil service need to be improved, and necessary amendments should be inserted, should be made, taking into account international experience, with which will clarify the concept of remote work or telework and strengthen the protection of those who work on this basis remotely. At the same time, such issues as the ability to independently organize the work process, the need for technical equipment, and the reimbursement of costs for organizing the workplace of civil servants require all outside study, again, the further research. In addition, a number of questions states remain open. Which business processes can be brought into remote operation on a long-term or permanent basis? So, and second question, what business processes should be conducted on a remote meetings or in the office? And number of other questions. So I should end the presentation with this statement. The seventh reform was a strategic plan until 2025, which Kazakhstan has launched in the frame of the processes of the third modernization of the country, identified the public sector as the leader of the changes, showing an increase in the role of state bodies as initiators and agents of changes in the country by their own example. So in the frame of this reform, in our view, it is possible to realize the above mentioned issues. Thank you for your attention. I think that it was brief enough. If you have questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mirat Omarov, for this very interesting presentation. Indeed, telecommuting is becoming a new reality, and it's relevant for most of us now in the new COVID pandemic situation. I would like to ask you to reserve your questions until the end of the session, but in the meantime, you can you can use Q&A tab. I'm welcoming all the participants and encouraging all of you to ask questions in the Q&A tab, and then we will read and answer your questions by the end of the session. Now, let me announce our second speaker. It is Ms. Kuldana Hamzina. She is a PhD candidate at Nazarbayev University Graduate School of Public Policy, and her presentation will be titled Implications of COVID-19, Provision of Services for People with Psychosocial Needs a systems level approach to COVID-19 policies. Over to you, Guldana.
Good afternoon. I apologize for some technical delays. Because of that, I'm second. So my name is Guldana Khamzina, and I'm a PhD student at GSPP. Me and my colleague, we prepared this presentation based on our research that we have been carrying out since the beginning of the COVID. So I would like, before we start, I start talking about the our research, I would like to first talk about the current situation in Kazakhstan. So around 4% of total population are disabled, and among them...
do you have PowerPoint?
Oh, I thought I shared it. No?
There's a share option.
Just a second.
Or Janna or Guldana, if you can check share option.
Just a second.
It's Janna. I think you can stop sharing Mirat's presentation and then switch to Guldana's. Janna?
Yes, hi, Sarik. Mirat has been stopped sharing. Guldana, if you could share your screen, please. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I'm able only to share my screen, entire screen.
Yes, if you open your presentation on your computer, and then if you take...
I think it's working now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Okay, sure. So overall, the number of people with disabilities is 4%, and among them, around 200,000 are the people with multiple types of psychosocial disabilities. So what happened is, in 2015, Kazakhstan ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And since the beginning of that ratification, not only public sector, but also private sector, NGOs and nonprofit organizations were able to provide services for people with psychosocial disabilities. So it is called the institutionalization of psychiatric system. So what does it mean, the institutionalization of psychiatric system? It is a common practice that is worldwide practice of caring for individuals in the community rather than in institutional environment. It is been implemented in developed countries nowadays. With the institutionalization of psychiatric facilities, psychiatric system, supportive living concept was embedded. So what does supportive living or supported living mean? Overall, it's a holistic approach to address functional impairment, develop practical living skills, improve social functioning, and promote recovery and independence among people with psychosocial disabilities. For a person with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities in Kazakhstan, this is the map of what are the perspectives, what are the options in terms of quality of life, provision of medical health services. So as you can see, the first stage is healthcare facility or diagnosis. Nowadays, diagnosis system has been embedded in primary healthcare clinics. After that, there is a treatment in psychiatric hospitals, or there is an option for outpatient treatment, and sometimes there is a misdiagnosis of such disabilities or such disease. Due to certain cultural perception and competency of specialists as well. So as you can see, there are some public programs for mental health and mental wellness in overall that is not fully implemented in like national scale, but there are some attempts. And these are the psychiatric treatment and health was under supervised by the Ministry of Healthcare. And as you can see, after the discharge of from these facilities, medical facilities, there is an option to for a person to go to psychiatric boarding housing or to be discharged, which means in case of dischargement, that person has is going to be left with no assistance. In ideal view, what our constitution states for people with disabilities, there should be all opportunities and all opportunities to provide rehabilitation, habilitation, and integration into society, inclusion into society for people with such disabilities. But as you can see, we do not have that much of practice and policies for aiming that to provide such inclusion for this vulnerable group of people. Also, the rehabilitation and habilitation part is in collaboration, has to be aimed in collaboration of ministries of education, labor and social protection, healthcare, and also local government and private sector. So what we have in literature review about supportive living, as we have been conducting, carrying on our studies, so there are big debate about the efficiency and effectiveness of private government service provision. That the common idea that the government services are more systemic and more unified rather than private service provision. But there is an overall trend that we were able to trace that the provision of services moving towards privatization of social services. And there is a gap in literature about the cost and efficiency, as it is still in the process of implementing, especially in developing countries. Another idea that emerged from the literature, another point, is the reduction of hospitalization time, number of hospitalizations, and number of duration days spent in the hospitals connected to the supporting living programs. There has been a trend that in communities where supportive living programs were implemented, the hospitalization numbers have been reduced. And also there is a great gap in reporting standards overall, how to standardize a reporting system in such services and provide consistent and meaningful descriptions of supported accommodation services. And with the emergence, with the beginning of the pandemic, it is worth noting that World Health Organization have reported that shifting away from institutions to community-based care have yielded more effective crisis response, have yielded more effective responses for COVID emergency situation. So based on that, we designed our research in this following way. So the aim of our research is to evaluate the sustainability of the supportive living projects during COVID-19 in Kazakhstan. Research question is to how have the pilot projects responded and adjusted to COVID-19 crisis? To answer to this research question, we employed case studies of these three organizations, how they have provided services. And there are two hypotheses that emerged from the literature review is that small-scale organizations provide sustainable and quality services during COVID-19 for the people with psychosocial disabilities. And the second is that provision of services weren't disrupted by this pandemic, by the emergency. So if we start about the supportive living projects in Kazakhstan, first, it has started since 2015. There are only three projects that are currently working, that are currently in progress. These are three: Kamkhorotau by Psychoanalytic Association, Independent Living Center by Ruh Foundation, and the Independent Living Center, it's by Center of Special Social Services. Beneficiaries are the people who are benefiting from these projects. People with psychosocial disabilities are of the age of 18 and over. In each project, there are 20 to 23 people, and more than half of these beneficiaries have low level of literacy and limited basic social skills. So by basic social skills, we're talking here about the general social skills that we accustomed to see as normal. For example, buying grocery, taking a bus, being able to calculate your income or how you spend your money, and so on. So this is the overall provision of services required by the standards on special social services. According to these standards, all facilities, psychiatric facilities, provide services for patients. So this is housing, rehabilitation and habilitation, employment, and employability. Here it's very important to note, by employment, we're talking about not full employment, but adjusted employment, depending on physical and psychological needs of beneficiaries. Education. Next is legal assistance and economic and financial advising. The other two sectors are social, cultural, and counseling and psychiatric treatment. So the idea is why we have this 8 services divided into these categories is because with this supportive living project, it is the idea that NGO is to provide all of these services to beneficiaries, to the people with psychosocial disabilities, in an environment not that which is closed up. As we commonly know, such facilities like boarding house, they are very isolated. They are not open to society, and a lot of the way how they provide these services is very limited, and people are not familiar what is going on behind the curtain. So if we look at the first case, and it's also very important to note that throughout our studies, we were able to access only one of these projects, and we're still in the process of obtaining data from other 2 projects. So what we have from the first case is Kamkhorotau, the initial assessment of their resources. So for HR, overall, the management, the NGO consists of administrative units of 4 people, psychiatrist, one specialist, counselor, 1 specialist, social worker, and 2 educators. Also, there are some opportunities for volunteering, but it's not very widely practiced. For financing, these projects are financed by a local Department of Social Services, international local donors, and donations. So throughout the case study, we have assessed how the project Akhamkorotau have been providing these services during starting from the beginning of the pandemic lockdown and after the lockdown was lifted. So for housing, what we revealed that majority of housing is independent living. Most of the beneficiaries live on their own and not in a commune or not in a shared area. Some of them, they live under supervision. During the lockdowns, NGO provided assistance in food provision as they were not allowed to go outside, and they weren't allowed to go outside without any supervision for the safety. For rehabilitation and habilitation, in this sector, it was reported that there was no major changes in overall well-being, as the counseling and psychiatric treatment was not interrupted fully, that they have full access to services of specialists, psychiatrists, and online sessions, except the group sessions that they held in a big group. For employment, there is still part-time employment retained after the quarantine measures. And for education, also beneficiaries were very keen on using technologies, and they were able to have good, effective educational process under the online supervision. For sociocultural service, interactive online activities were implemented, but they're still limited, as it was reported that after the lockdown were lifted, they were able to still socialize and meet up within their community. So for economic and financial advising and legal assistance, there hasn't been that much of changes, as these services were provided as it was before the pandemic. From this case, we can highlight some achievements and challenges. The achievement of this supportive living project is that there was a 0 case of psychiatric medicinal treatment. It is a huge achievement, because in initially there are a lot of skepticism about this project, about how it is possible to not to use such psychiatric treatment for people who had been already on such treatment. 0 cases or symptoms of COVID-19 among beneficiaries and staff. It is still yet to determine, because there are some issues with access for free testing. Also, online counseling and educational process have been successful. Beneficiaries did not see that big difference or transition from moving from regular counseling to online counseling, because they have been already employing such online counseling before the pandemic. And the next is increase in awareness of the pandemic and information about pandemic measures. For challenges is there is a huge there were some issues related to the access to public health facilities, to hospitals, polyclinics, for matters of not health-related issues that are not psychiatric related. So therefore, some services were obtained through private carriers. No assistance from healthcare department in testing for COVID-19. That was one of these bureaucratic issues that the NGO administration wouldn't be able to receive answers for for this issue. And another one is increased spending on COVID preventive measures as medication and supplies. Overall, one of the bigger challenges is that no clear legal or bureaucratic procedures on supportive living programs. Even the local government representatives did not have greater understanding of how to proceed, what kind of measures to take in the matter of supportive living programs. So these are our preliminary findings. The first is that supportive living programs are feasible for further implementation in Kazakhstan, as was apparent from the first case study that they response to in times of emergency were very adequate, and they were able still provide good quality services. The projects are capable and sustainable to respond in times of emergency. This is our second finding. And the next one is low level of local government involvement in terms of logistic and bureaucratic issues. And another finding is that services were provided with minor disruptions, and some of these services were provided through altered way. For the further research, we'd like to continue on first complete the two cases of supportive living projects to see what are the similarities and differences among these three projects, and to try to assess if there are minor disruption in service provision overall among these three projects, and if there are any factors that contributed to service provision. So this is, thank you for your attention, and I'm ready for your questions.
Guldana, for this very interesting presentation. Indeed, our panel is pretty diverse in terms of exploring the implications of COVID for health, and then we will see some educational perspectives. So without delay, I will turn and give the floor to Jenny, Miss Jenny Janishkazel. Let me briefly introduce Jenny. She's a founder of New Schools Foundation, and she's a community champion for Central Asia and Azerbaijan, nominated by Global Shapers Community, which is the initiative of the World Economic Forum. And so Jenny will present your topic, and if you can share your presentation, please. There is a share option here in our platform.
I know that. Can you hear me? Sarah, is
yes, good. I think.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sarah, for the instructions. Right. So now let me go here. So now you're all on my screen,
yes,
right?
We see that the presentation is there. It's about policy recommendations from the evidence-based research and community works during the COVID-19 new norm of schooling. So over to you, Jenny, and please unmute yourself, because now we can hear you, I think. Yeah.
All right. So during the COVID-19 global pandemic, we all talk about public health crisis, economic crisis, but have you really talked about the learning and education crisis? So good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Selamat starter. My name is Jenny Janishkazel from the Kyrgyz Republic. When I first applied this conference, my initial plan was to share with you the research paper I conducted with my team at LKY-SPP on digital divide and educational inequality during the COVID-19. So this research paper won the first prize of 2020 Tsinghua University Public Policy Case Competitions on SDGs. But soon after, back in my country, Kyrgyzstan, we initiated this community work called Mugalim. We provided digital skill trainings for teachers. So I'm thinking whether I can combine both my research and my community work together to provide you more practical insights. So I really hope you can enjoy it and hope you find it helpful. Briefly about myself, Sarah already introduced. So I have almost 10 years of community work experience as a social entrepreneur. In the last couple of years, I've been working in the education sector in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. To better understand the educational policy, last year I went to the Kuan Yu School of Public Policy in Singapore to pursue my second master's degree. So only this year, I recently graduated from its MPA program. I'm really very passionate about using public policy and technology to transform the education. So in terms of the future education, I bet like many governments, they have their very ambitious plan on their paper, right? Including the Kyrgyz government. So while they are sharing their vision towards the future of schooling, this COVID-19 just hit everyone. We have to face it right now. So we are forced to have this remote learning, and we are also now doing this virtual conferences like this. So I do believe like, so this rapid digital transformation is not only striking for the developing world, but it's also for the developed countries, such as Singapore, for example. So Singapore government, recently, they decided like fasten their plan 7 years earlier. Instead of 2018, they wanted to make sure that all second school students get their digital learning device by next year. Why is that so urgent? Let's look at this very brief statistic. If 2 years ago, there were 258 million children out of the school, but due to the pandemic, at its peak pandemic season, this number reached 1.6 billion out of the school. This is a map of the UNESCO. So it provides you the data, the visualizations on how the situation of the school closure. The blue color represents those region and the country whose schools were open. And the purple one, it is the one like schools were closed. The pink, it is like a partially open and partially closed, okay? So this map is in 2020 February, which is the initial stage of the global pandemic. Let's see what happened after 2 months. All over the world, almost. So over 140 countries, they activated school closure, all right? So, and then our schools gradually get recovered because of the pandemic issue is decreasing, only starting from the August. This is the October, the recent data. We still have like half of the world populations, they are like exposed to the school closures. So the reason I'm using this mapping data, I want to demonstrate that this is the first time ever in human history, like education crisis, the COVID, the pandemic, impact all over the world, over the night, globally. It doesn't discriminate your developing countries or underdeveloped countries. And to cope with this education crisis, majority country, they use internet, televisions, radio, and the mobile apps to continue their virtual schooling. But we still need to bear in mind, there are 3 billion people deprived from the internet connectivity. And my research paper I just mentioned, like we conducted before, as well as other international reports, demonstrated the digital divide is widening and the education inequality is growing. So UNICEF just also mentioned, inherent inequalities now do pose a threat to the global learning crisis. So the COVID-19 has been named a great unequalizer. Based on the International Monetary Fund, they said that, oh, COVID has wiped out almost 10 years of progress in development work. So how about economically? McKinsey firm just estimated, right, just in the United States, the result of the learning loss of students, it will affect their learning, their earning, it's almost about 1 year of full-time work, okay? And imagine, nowadays, those students in K-12, which is from the first class to the high school graduation, by 2040, they will become the main labor force. So learning loss, it will affect the productivity loss. And productivity loss, it will definitely hurt the long-term economic growth. According to the World Bank, this economic loss of Central Asia results from the learning loss is $44 billion. This still was not the worst scenario. All right, I understand like we have a lot of urgent tasks in terms of mitigating the public health crisis, economic crisis, but I really want to use this platform to advocate to our policymakers. If we do not pay attention to the educational crisis, so this will bring this irreversible loss for the state development in the future. So from this global situation, I would like to bring your attention now to the Kyrgyz Republic. Kyrgyzstan is a relatively very young country, is a young age population because among 6 million, we have 1.3 million students. They are now studying at schools, and majority are in the rural area. In Kyrgyzstan, the school closure happened from April till nowadays. Most of the schools, they're closed, except the class 1, the beginning class, and the kindergarten. This is an internet survey talking about the education inequality in Kyrgyzstan. Because of this online education, I'm not going to address this. Let's quickly take a look how other international stakeholders are playing to cope with this crisis. Like international organization, Internet Society in Kyrgyzstan chapter, they have the project called Ilimbox. So this is basically download all this content from Agahan and Wikipedia to this hard drive, and they will set up in different schools in the mountainous area and rural area. So in this pattern, students without the internet connectivity, they still can access the learning content. Other businesses like telecommunication business, they also offer many kind of very cheaper like internet mobile like package for students, but most of these initiatives are helping students. So now my question is, who's gonna help teachers? Our minister said, yes, now we are on online education, we need to get ready for that. But unfortunately, like usually policymakers, they talk about their plan, but there's no implementation. For now, together with Global Shapers Community and the New School Foundations, which I funded a year ago, we are the first who took this initiative to train the teachers' digital skills. This is so important. It's also like critical to reduce the growing digital divide between the rural and the urban area, which is reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals number 4. Okay, let me tell you how we started, okay, this community work. From zero budget. August 8, we just posted on Facebook, said, hey, teachers, do you want to get training? This is for free. If you want, please just sign up. At the beginning, we with our team, we were expecting maybe about 50 or 100 teachers. That's what happened in 50 hours. We have 425 responses from teachers. And in 3 weeks, we have 1,531 teachers sign up. It's within 3 weeks. We had to close our deadline much earlier because it's already getting overwhelming for us to carry out this training. So on your right-hand side, you see the profile of the teachers. It's quite like a ratio, like we have all representative teachers from different regions, like rural area, not only in the capital city. And if you see that the Russian language, the Kyrgyz language, so teachers teaching in Kyrgyz language are much more than teaching in Russian language. So, you know, at that moment, at the one hand, we're so worried, like, oh, it's too many people sign up. But on the other hand, we feel like those teachers are so desperate. They're desperate in the need of the help for this digital capacity training. And in addition to train the teacher, recruiting teachers, we also were recruiting mentors. The role of the mentors are to engage the teachers to go online to study, and also to help answer all the Q&A and make sure the teachers apply their training in their class. So good thing, like we use this Google form to collect this data. So I would like to quickly share a very interesting point. It turns out in our teachers, 96.6% they have smartphones, but only 73% they have a computer or notebook. So this is a good signal for us in the future If we want to provide more training, so we better to develop on the soft part, which is on the mobile phone. Fortunately, 92% they have the internet access, and 90% they have the Gmail. So the reason we were having the survey and the big data, because we want to access the digital conditions and the capacity of those teachers. Based on their needs, based on the client's needs, we develop this curriculum. This is a 10 days training from very beginning, how to use Google, Zoom, and to Google Classroom until how they finish their class. So I would like to tell, we are not only teaching them how to use the tools, we are also teaching them, training them how to use the pedagogy online. It means how to engage the students online, how to communicate with the students online. And in the end, it's not only about training, they also have these assignments and they have to make sure they are able to apply their skills to design their own class. September, we started Mualim version 1.0. So we want to test this out. So we use this very agile business model. So we first piloted among 20 teachers and keep growing, keep redesigning and to also listen their feedbacks. And then 2 weeks ago, we had the Mualim 3.0. We already finished training 400 teachers with Russian language. This is a picture I want to show, which is in the kindergarten. So I told you, like, kindergarten now still is open. It turns out the peer sport. So if a teacher has another teacher in their school environment, so they are even much more motivated. And you see, like, our mentors, they're also helping them to answer the question and then to learn. In the end, they have to use the skill to design their class like this. All right, so we are expecting our next stage, it is Mualim 4.0. What does this mean? It means, like, from the Russian content, now we are going to Kyrgyz content. We still have 1,000 teachers to train. And very good news is recently, the Institute of the Improvement of Qualification and Pedagogical Preparedness under the Ministry of Education of the Kyrgyz Republic, they approach us for the collaboration. So they're proposing 2 weeks of training for teachers nationwide.
Excuse me.
First week,
can you kindly remind you about the time limit, because we are told. Yeah, thank you.
So second, it is so I'm just using this to tell, like, it's not necessarily it has to be top to down, this mobile, but this project is developed from the community base, bottom to up, and we are helping the ministry. We are not going to stop here, because in the future schooling, the founder of the World Economic Forum mentioned, in the future, we are not just staying online. We are not just going back to the previous. We are going to have this new schooling, which is called hybrid learning. So I would like to, in my last slide, quickly go through, just wrap up what I want to mean. In order to have this education crisis to cover and to develop further, to meet the norm of school, we have to make a systematic approach in terms of infrastructure, teachers training, governments, and private sectors. Teachers need to be trained online and hybrid learning. Data-driven training curriculum, it proves to be very effective, and teachers are very motivated by the mentor support and the peer support. Of course, we also like to advise the governments. So policy implementation, it is the most critical things here. We encourage government to use the big data, like us, what we are doing, to tailor the needs of the teachers and the schools. And government should also actively partner with the community and the private sector. And there's also other international practice, like government can make the tax deduction for the companies or tax reforms. So that makes the internet more accessible and makes the digital device more affordable. And definitely we have a strong, I want to advocate. We need to get ready for the future schooling. It is a new model of pedagogy. Of course, we strongly encourage the private sector to invest in EdTech, to have these innovations, and also the PPP-like partnerships. Thank you so much. I think in order to teach them how to get the fish, we better to teach them how to do fishing. So in order to ensure the quality online education and the new schooling, we have to start with our teachers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And now let me pass the word to our next speaker, Ms. Marietta Stevemanova. She's a PhD student at the Education University of Hong Kong. She will be presenting about systematic review of educational responses to the COVID-19 crisis in Kazakhstan. So while our presenter is uploading your PowerPoint, I have been receiving messages from organizers that at 5:30 sharp, we will be starting concluding remarks for this conference. So this is why I'd like to ask the presenters to be aware of the time limit. And unfortunately, I think I had several questions to the speakers, but if we don't get questions in the Q&A tab from the participants, I think I will have to reserve my questions for myself, and we will conclude after that. So without delay, I will pass the word to Marietta. And can you please make a full screen presentation, because we don't see the letter.
You don't see?
It's
Can you see now?
It's a bit small.
Okay. Let's see. Can you see now at full screen? No?
A bit better, and it's clear now.
Okay, great.
Can you try to switch between slides?
Yes, sure. Yeah. Okay. So now, hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting to hear different opinions from different areas. So I would like to present my paper on systematic review of educational responses to the COVID-19 crisis in Kazakhstan. So a bit similar to Jenny, but more concentrated on Kazakhstan. So I will go through the method that I have used in my paper. Then I'll go to the background pre-COVID situation in education in Kazakhstan, followed by educational responses in education sector in Kazakhstan and challenges that our education sector faced during the pandemic, and then I will end up with implications. So in my paper, I followed the conceptual framework for systematic review of research in educational leadership and management, presented by Philip Hellinger. I have analyzed major databases such as ERIC, Google Scholar, Scopus, Education Research Complete, and others. And what I have found that there's a very limited amount of literature in English on crisis management in education sector, and there's very limited literature on educational responses to the COVID-19 in Kazakhstan. So I have mainly analyzed great literature, such as government reports, policy statements, and frameworks. According to educational consultant Michael Phelan, main education systems around the world are stalled. There were no significant changes in education sphere for about 125 years. So almost 1 in every 5 students does not reach a basic minimum level of skills to function in today's society. According to the recent World Bank report, in Kazakhstan, our system was struggling to provide, before COVID-19, was struggling to provide high quality education to all students. And based on the OECD program for international student assessment in 2018, student performance of Kazakhstani students dropped from its 2012 level. And our Kazakhstani students were ranked 69 out of 77 countries in reading, and around the same results in mathematics and science. So our Kazakhstani school students are roughly 2.5 years behind average OECD country student. And in Kazakhstan, around 2/3 of students perform below functional literacy. So when the COVID hit, 191 government have closed schools. And in Kazakhstan, more than 5 million students were affected by the crisis, including almost 3 million school students.
Implementing a policy response to a crisis such as COVID has been and continues to be very challenging for many countries around the world. Therefore, a number of international organizations such as OECD, World Bank, UNESCO presented their framework to help governments structure the implementation strategy of educational responses to COVID. And Kazakhstan, in most of the cases, followed this recommendation that were highlighted in this frameworks. So one of the first response to COVID-19 in Kazakhstan was early release for holidays. And during the 3 weeks holidays in the spring, our education systems tried to prepare for distant learning. Our Ministry of Education also published orders and guidelines for the implementation of educational programs, which was also used by many OECD countries around the world. And our Ministry of Education also developed sanitary requirements for educational organization, methodological recommendations, and requirements for IT competitiveness of teachers. However, after the first trial distant learning class in Kazakhstan, after failure of the first class, our government responded really quickly and by providing very different approaches of remote learning, including TV-based learning, email, social media, WhatsApp, video conferencing tools, and small schools were also allowed to have face-to-face classes. Most of the government schools adopted asynchronous education through WhatsApp and email. So teachers send like small 5-7 minutes videos explaining the class, and students had to respond in 20 minutes with by taking a photo of their homework.
Excuse me, Marietta.
Yes.
We can see only title page of your presentation.
Oh, really?
Maybe, can you manually shift to other pages? Yes, now we can see other pages.
Okay, I'm gonna do this. Yes.
This is better.
So,
yes.
So yeah, also our government tried to establish a communication, which also followed the frameworks provided in the OECD to tackle educational responses. They did it by websites, official websites, also social media, and mass media. And they also built a strategy for school reopening. But there was a number of educational challenges during the pandemic that some of them were partially addressed by the government. So first of all, it was access to devices. According to OECD in Kazakhstan, around 40% of students don't have access to a computer. So our government in new academic year transferred about 500,000 computers to students and around 30,000 computers to teachers. There was also problems with access and the speed of the internet. Around 490,000 students don't have access to the internet. As you can see in this two pictures, there is a problem in rural settlements where kids had to go to the railroads to get access to the internet to study. And Kazakhstan also is ranked 98th in the world for mobile speeds, which is really low, and it's hard to download any video. There was also a problem of low ICT knowledge of students and teachers. Before COVID-19, 80% of teachers were not trained to use online platforms, and around 33% of students don't have the minimum level of computer literacy. So our government, our ministry has organized webinars for teachers, which took place during the school holidays. But there was also problems that were not addressed or not sufficiently addressed. So first of all, it's the well-being of teachers, students, and parents. There was an anxiety and stress on the rise between these groups because schools play a vital role for individual well-being, social cohesion, and health. And policies should be narrowed down to include also a well-being and equity issues. And well-being is meaning not only taking care of student physical and mental health, but also development of social emotional skills. So, around the world, there's acknowledgement that well-being is one of the critical preconditions for effective learning. There was also problems where it was parental involvement, with parents working from home. Parental work needs are prioritized above children's schools, and it's likely that only students from families with good connectivity and multiple computers can fully utilize the remote teaching in place. And parental support and involvement became crucial for the continuity of learning, but not all of parents know and can promote quality education at home. So around 40% of respondents of the survey that was conducted in May 2020 noted that a lack of time to deal with the children. Around 10 said that there's a lack of sufficient knowledge to teach children. Another problem is that there's a decrease in engagement of students, and there's a low interest. The survey showed that TV-based learning was not interesting and engaging for most of the students in Kazakhstan. And teachers are using all pedagogy and trying to teach online the same way as they teach face-to-face classes, which is not really effective in a new world. So it all end up in higher absenteeism. What is likely to be after COVID-19? The report by World Bank showed that the COVID-19 pandemic is resulting in the equivalent of 8 PISA points drop. So more students will be functionally illiterate in the post-COVID period. So also the percentage of students below functional literacy will increase by 3%. There's also expecting of widening of socioeconomic achievement gap because while remote teaching is really hard for all students, it's even harder for students from lower socioeconomic groups. And students with special needs may also face unique challenges accessing remote learning content. So the reading achievement gap between richest and poor will increase by 18% after only a short-term school closure. So the increased achievement gap and the income shock of the current pandemic can cause an increase of dropouts, particularly for disadvantaged students in Kazakhstan. There's also huge learning losses, and reduced years of schooling for students will affect students by reducing their expected income by an estimate of 2.9% in the future. But this challenge should not come as a surprise, because this disruption only revealed systems that are already struggling to provide quality education to all learners. And we should learn from this period. And this pandemic showed us that the role of schools is not only concentrated on learning, but it's also important for well-being of students. The roles of schools and teachers, principals are renewed, and there's a awareness raised that for need for education system to have an emergency plans to cope quickly with potential disasters in the future. There has been much improvement and innovation by teachers and schools in short amounts of time, and this pandemic revealed that there's a time for change in education sector. But first, we have to know where is Kazakhstan in navigating the disruption. So this is framework provided by Fullen and Quinn, shows the 3 zones of our disruptions. And Kazakhstan is somewhere near unsettled zone and learning zone. So we still in Kazakhstan need to tackle questions such as connection to the internet, what content should we learn, what platforms should we use, providing access to technology, connectivity, and managing communications. And in terms of pedagogy, learning online in this unsettled zone, and which was in case in Kazakhstan, is that it looks like more like a traditional teacher-centered approach and content-driven practice. But we are moving slowly to the learning zone as our system tries to think more about well-being of students and equity issues. What we have to do is to move to the growth zone to learn from these disruptions, to have new insights, to develop new models of education. And countries that have moved to the growth zone are not going back to the status quo that before COVID-19. They're changing their education systems. They're finding that well-being is a critical condition for learning, that technology is not only used for delivery of information and transmission, but also for collaboration, social connectedness, and cultural building. So Kazakhstan now is in the first phase, is in disruption. Hopefully in the future, we're gonna move, in the near future, we're gonna move to the transition, to reopening schools. And after that, well, I think we will be ready to reimagine our learning system and create more agile, innovative, and future-focused education system in Kazakhstan. And on the positive note, I would like to note that we should not let this crisis go to waste. We should use this crisis as an opportunity to improve our education system and just to move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Miruert. Indeed, very encouraging words. We should not let this crisis go to waste, and something to remember indeed. And thank you for being aware of the time limit. It's perfect. And so, as I said, the plans changed slightly at the last minute, so we plan to end at.
Just a second.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. Yeah, we had plans to end at 5:30, but plans just changed at last minute. So as I said, if we don't get questions in the Q&A section, I will have to cut the discussion part. But I will have to say that we had a very interesting panel with diverse range of research. And I'd like to thank all our participants for sharing your time and sharing your fascinating and very timely research today with us. And of course, I was delighted to welcome today alumni of students of GSPP and the alumni of LKYSPP, which is indeed an institution which is very close to us. It's pity that we had to cut our discussion session, but this is not our last chance to participate in the discussion in this conference, because later on we will have a networking event, and it will be announced at the closing remarks session. And for now, I'd like to thank you all again, and I invite you to join our closing session at 5:30. So it's in a few minutes. Thank you very much, and I wish you all good luck.
Thank you.
And wish you productive research. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.